With Salmon Run and how various the comps can be, each weapon is tested on its ability of control. As of today, there are 66 weapons in the mode, meaning that the choices and abilities for every weapon are sporadic. For this video, I will be going over the middle tiers. These weapons meet up to solid standards and will get the job done, but are not at the same skill ceiling and share the same ability as the high tiers. For the weapons to be placed in the tier they're in, there are 3 factors: maintaining pace and consistency, being versatile, and just being a fun and enjoyable weapon overall. Please note that the weapons in each tier are in no order. Everything here is solely my opinion. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions. If you haven't seen the latest part where I go over the bottom tiers, be sure to check that out as well. The link will be in the description. If you like content such as this, be sure to like and subscribe as more is planned out to release. With that being said, let's get into the rankings. After completing the D and the C tier, we move on to the B tier, where it's the meaning of the weapon that gets the job done. Starting off, we have the OG Blaster. This weapon does neatly for its area of effect by being able to take down many groups of lessers and attack in a larger radius than that of the Rapid Blaster for a single shot. Its DPS is the same as the Rapid at 240, which is good for it having a larger radius. However, as we go more into the tiers, this weapon is stuck as the middle child of AoE weapons. Other weapons such as the Luna Blaster and the Clash Blaster can do the same thing, but either at a faster speed or in a larger radius. You might think the Explosion is good for its infamous ability to kill mudmouths and flyfish with the main weapon only, and I have to agree that it can pull off these abilities really well. But it has its difficulties of being slow at taking down bosses such as Scrappers, Big Shots, and Steelheads if you miss a single shot. Again, it's great at taking down mudmouths and flyfish and has really good paint, but it struggles with self-sufficiency, like the H3 or the Tetra Dualies. The Flingza Roller shares a lot of the issues that the Splat Roller has in terms of its rolling and its horizontal flicking capabilities. However, if it wasn't for its vertical flick being able to kill steelheads up close like a hot knife through butter, this would have had the same issues as the Splat Roller, where it deals with terrible knockback and pretty unreliable damage when flicking. Moving on to the first Grizzco weapon of the entire series, we have the Splatbrella. You might be surprised as to why it's at such a low tier, but the damage with this weapon tends to lack compared to the other Grizzco weapons. It can't consistently attack hordes of lessers like the G-Blaster can, it doesn't have good single shot damage like the Tenebrella, it doesn't shred through lines of enemies like the Slosher and Charger can with ease, and it feels like it loses its tankiness when even just a single pellet misses the target. With the negatives out of the way, this thing paints immeasurably well, so to get some more control in terms of paint is a neat factor. I will add though, that originally this weapon dealt only 60 damage per shot in Splatoon 2, as opposed to Splatoon 3's 80 damage. So if it maintained that low damage per shot, this would have likely been in the C tier due to an even poorer damage output. Despite the Brella class having a horrible representation in PvP for Splatoon 3 in general, I really underrated the Splatbrella and its capabilities in Salmon Run. The first thing I'm sure you're wondering is, Hydro, why in the world is this in the same tier as the Grizzcobrella? Well, we can start by addressing how consistent the damage is for single targets. The DPS is roughly at 372, which may be a little lower than the G-Brella's 400. However, this is much more reliable for single targets at once. I feel like every pellet hits and does the consistent damage needed. The G-Brella does 80 damage max per single target, whereas the Splatbrella does 180. This as a result just makes it feel more faithful, since less of my shots are needed for more damage, which I feel is really important on high hazards. The Afterbrush in a lot of aspects is really similar to the Inkbrush, but despite it being slower and a little less mobile, its trade-off of more damage and more reach definitely give this the upper edge for me. There isn't really much more to it, knowing it's just a tankier and better ink brush, but the small ink tank does take away from its performance, knowing you can't really flick too much after throwing an egg. If you paid attention, there's only one other brush that I haven't mentioned, and it takes both the ink brush and the Octobrush's ability and throws it right out the window. If you've watched my previous video, you might have heard me mention that the NZAP 85 does what the Junior does, but with better accuracy. This gets the edge due to said reason, meaning it's more reliable against important targets, such as steelheads and fish sticks. It gets the job done as a decent short-ranged weapon. Nothing more to it though. The Splash-O-Matic is essentially the NZAP, but with better accuracy, which is amazing for taking down targets that require you to aim well. This is pretty biased though for some, because I just love playing this weapon. But there isn't anything too special about it in this mode. It shares the same DPS as the NZAP and the Junior with 330 sits, but every shot hits if you aim accordingly, so every bullet counts. In Splatoon 2 Salmon Run, the range blaster to me was one of the worst weapons to play. It dealt about 200 damage for a direct, which meant it takes 3 directs to take down scrappers, steel eels, and goldies during rush, or 2 directs and an indirect. This weapon was essentially worse than the V-Blaster, as it was essentially that, but worse as it not only fires slower, but has less DPS. As a result, I felt like I was playing both an unreliable and a slow weapon. But this is where the devs got to make it right. The Rage Blaster has grown so much on me as a weapon in this game, both in PvP and Salmon Run. This weapon got buffed in all of the right directions. Its direct damage deals 250, and the indirect deals 150 now. This changes the weapon a lot, because now, less combos are needed. Steelheads are a 2-shot no matter what, scrappers and lids are a 2-direct kill, and with the addition of fish sticks, the reliability of this weapon went belly up as of today. This weapon is still very slow to start off with, and you also have to be mindful of your distance, because one shot off can cost you pretty badly. But with everything being said, the buffs made this weapon go in the right direction with no question. I will say though, this is a weapon that is placed in the B tier because of how high its skill ceiling can reach. So there are some blasters that, to some, might have better efficiency due to how people personally perceive its firepower. The L3 Nozzle Nose is a textbook example of getting the job done, but not as the same ability as the high tiers. It's a lot like the N-Zap, where it can essentially do consistently decent damage, but having to repeatedly spam the ZR button can be a little tiring, despite its better reach. Another thing is that the heavier duty shooters can essentially do the same thing as this weapon, but more consistently. The Reflex is a weapon I don't play too much, but have definitely grown an accumulated taste for. Originally, I thought it was worse than the Ink Brush, with how poor its damage was at one point, but ever since its buff, where it does better damage for tap shotting, it's much more consistent at taking care of lessers, or targets that require you to do fast firing. Essentially, this is just the Ink Brush but with not only arguably better paint, but has the accessibility to do a charged accurate shot if need be, which adds greatly to its design and camaraderie. I really have mixed feelings about the Splat Charger, as its upsides to me are great, but its downsides heavily weigh it down. For the cons, I really dislike how this only has 5 full charge shots. There are so many times where I need this to fire more from my tank, especially with how little breathing room there is in this mode. This opens up cans of worms for instances where I'm overwhelmed with salmonids that target me. However, on the positive side, this is the #1 weapon I think of when it comes to taking down steelheads. With ease and its reliable 300 damage per charged shots, it's a faithful weapon for targets that are far away, mothership coolers, or if I need to tag a scrapper. The Undercoverrella has been buffed to become a much better weapon than it was. I love the fact that this can consistently take down lessers with more damage per shot, and is much more reliable against damage-based bosses, such as scrappers, stingers, steelheads, and eels. Also, just look at how amazing this does on rush waves. Its downsides, however, is its weak shield durability, which, without that shield, the plays you make become more risky without having something to defend yourself, against something like steelhead bombs or flyfish missiles. You'd be surprised to see the Snipe Rider in the B tier rather than C or D, but ever since its buff, like with the Undercover and the Reflex, this has become a much more faithful weapon for me. Originally, all 5 shots would only deal 900 damage, which, if every shot were to hit, can kill a Drizzler. That's fine I guess, but ever since this buff, not only does it take 4 shots to kill a Drizzler, but it one cycles a big shot. With its range, this has become a much more reliable weapon for single targets. The only reason why this isn't at a tier any higher is that it cannot pierce through lessers for its long charge time. The Rapid Pro feels the same as the regular Rapid for me, and you're wondering why this is above it. The reason is because this thing is so good at taking down fish sticks before they land. And transitioning over from Splatoon 2 to Splatoon 3, the base game buff this weapon got is that it now kills steelheads in 2 shots instead of 3. Despite having a lower DPS at 225, as opposed to the Rapid's 240, the trade-off of single shot damage and range save it from being in the C tier. The Squeezer shares a lot of capabilities with the Jet Sculpture for its great range. The weapon is super good at killing steelheads and fish sticks with its long range, alongside Chinooks and Stingers. And that's about all I can say for it. I feel that this is one of the least reliable weapons for when you're crowded from lessers, and this can be important for pace and consistency. However, I must give credit where it's due, and this takes the cake for one of the most versatile weapons, which is a neat plus. Following the Squeezer, we have the Jet Sculpture. This feels like the Squeezer's long range mode, but if you just had to hold ZR. The reason why it's in the same tier though, is because this loses versatility points, as the Squeezer has different ways of attacking. whereas the jet is pretty monotonous and one-sided. The Tri-Stringer shares a lot of similarities to the Reflex, because, well, they're the only two normal bows in the game. What I like about this weapon is that it's great at taking down steelheads with its full charge, and any pesky targets from afar. I will say, when I first got my hands on this weapon at launch, I was so disheartened to find out that its arrows cannot take down flyfish launchers. I really thought it could like the Explosion. Had it have had this ability, this without a doubt would have been changed to be in the S tier. It's difficult for this weapon to capitalize on important bits of a wave, namely the last 30 seconds, where everything comes together for the final result. What I like about the Big Swig Roller compared to the others is that it's essentially the Splat Roller, with much better paint and versatility. The only downside and the reason as to why it's in the same tier as the Flingza is because it cannot one-shot steelheads with its vertical flick. This weapon is amazing for painting purposes, so instances where it's needed at the basket for flopper zone paint and crushing lessers with its large horizontal hitbox, this gives it the edge over the Splat Roller. Ending off the B tier, we have probably the most controversial placement, but this goes to the Clash Blaster. Now, I get it. How in the world is this placed here? Allow me to show you the true power of it. This is amazing at taking care of these incessant, important targets. Being able to take them down with ease ups the pace greatly, and just feels great to do. Speed is important in this mode, and this has that and more. Where this lacks, however, is that it cannot one-shot chum, and takes a while killing certain bosses, and its reach makes it pretty bad and puts you in a state of need to be up in the front lines. And this weapon is pretty bad at defending itself against anything outside of lessers. But as I said, this weapon shreds lessers, and ever since their speed got buffed based game, this is quite huge for the weapon itself. This wraps up the B tiers for me. Notice how I've used these terms before, but we're really starting to get into a shift where weapons become more reliable and faithful. As we get into the A tier, the weapons reach a point where there are really underrated aspects that light will shine upon, as these will be able to do the job, and potentially more. Despite being arguably the most basic weapon, the Splattershot does consistently good damage. It shares the same DPS as the Aerospray at 360, but that's where the differences begin to kick in. What puts this above the Aerospray is it having the following. It has better shot RNG on both the ground and the air, less shots are needed to kill targets, and it has slightly better reach. The main thing I'd say the Aerospray has over the shot is paint, but everything else that the shot has just gives it much more leeway and makes it more consistent and overall better as a base weapon. With good aim and patience, the 96 Gal delivers accordingly and excels in its role. At first, I thought the weapon was fine, average like the others, but the more I play it, the more I realize that this can do the job and has a really good DPS of 425. However, what makes this lack compared to the 52 Gal is that if you play this in PvP, this RNG does not hit for how slow its fire rate is, and as a result, this can lack consistency as a weapon. To me, the 52 Gal gets the edge for how much faster its shots hit, and even though the 96 has better DPS, you'll want to ensure that every shot hits to make that happen. Following the underrated capabilities of the Splatbrella, the Tenebrella performs very well with a more powerful single shot to trade off for a slower fire rate. This deals double the Splatbrella single shot damage at roughly 360, and with the canopy rolling through, you are ensuring yourself a path to victory. I won't go all out for comparisons with this one, but what I love about this weapon is despite how technical it may be, it's very solid for a lot of skill levels, and its versatility adds on to being a fun weapon. Ever since the buff for both PvP and Salmon Run, the Splat Duallies have accumulated their ability to feel excellent as a weapon. When I think of this weapon, I think of agility, alongside the perfect turret mode, RNG, and speed. This does 360 damage like the Splattershot and Aerospray, but where this takes its advantage is that in its turret mode, this does 450 damage per second. I absolutely love this weapon's agility. What makes it lack a little is that every shot needs to hit, and the bullets are on the smaller side, and your range lacks a little, so you have to be on top of your aiming game to excel with these. But all in all, this feels very versatile with great DPS and adds to be fun to make this a good weapon in the end. Despite this charger being unable to pierce, the Bamboozler surprised me with how much of an accumulated taste it has. Now this is an opinion to take with a grain of salt, but I absolutely admire how good of a poking tool this weapon is. If there's any charger I think of that can take down fish sticks, this without question takes the cake. Despite the Gootuber as a close contender dealing 80 damage per tap shot, Bamboo having this much reach is crucial for versatility and what you can lure. If there is a weapon that is well known for its otherworldly DPS from a full charge, the Hydra Spotling makes for a great contender. Outside of fully charging it, it deals 525 damage per second, which is good, but if you take the time to fully charge it, this jumps from 525 to an amazing 900 DPS. This is what makes it absolutely amazing against essentially all bosses with the exception of the Flyfish, as your heavy weapon makes it difficult to push up or have self-sufficiency. But even then, with good positioning, you're on track to slay essentially all of the threats that come to basket, and having that ability makes you the weapon that essentially hard carries the wave. Where this lacks, however, is that its slowness makes it arguably difficult to work, and as a result, it's difficult to back yourself up from all directions. What makes the Mini Splatling heavily underrated is how fast the weapon is along with its firepower. It shares the same damage output as the Heavy Splatling at 525, except it does the job with more speed to trade off for less firing time. The Heavy and the Nautilus, for instance, tend to take a good second to charge fully and be ready to go, but the Mini can pull it off in just half a second. Essentially, if you can master its pace and speed, you've got yourself a weapon with great self-sufficiency. The Nautilus follows the Mini in terms of how mobile it can be, and I really like how long it can hold its charge for. Its DPS is about the same as the Mini at 525, and its range is pretty similar too. But there are a couple trade-offs. For one, the bullets tend to feel inconsistent for a high damaging weapon that takes a while to charge, and that could be a real threat on waves such as Rush, or against bosses where your timeliness is tested, or in this case Drizzlers, Steelheads, and Big Shots. With its inconsistencies, I do say for a weapon that has over 500 DPS, this is excellent with its mobility, and has a ton of fun factors that make it an overall quite enjoyable experience. Another weapon to join the buff train and make it go from 0 to hero is definitely the regular Slosher. Before the seasonal patch, the Slosher was quite a below average weapon that was good against lessers, but other Sloshers just did its job but better. Back before Sizzle season, it dealt only about 100 damage, just barely killing Chum, and barely being able to kill Cohawks given that the damage doesn't negate from fall off. But I'm glad to say that with the buff that it received, this now deals 140 damage per slosh, and this changes the weapon in all the right directions. The only real downside of it is that the high tiers can do its job but quicker in terms of its main strength, which is essentially taking down hordes of salmonids. All in all, the consistency that this weapon has, alongside being able to effortlessly take down hordes if you aim upwards, makes for a weapon that is deserved in the A tier. The sloshing machine followed the slosher's footsteps, except its buff-applied base game. The fact that indirects deal 100 damage now make this a complete powerhouse against chums, as this was not the case in Splatoon 2. Also, this is much better than the slosher in all aspects at taking down fish sticks if you aim indirectly, albeit this weapon strays pretty close to the B tier because of the terrible nerf that it got in PvP and that for some reason applied to Salmon Run. In case you're curious about the nerf, the fire rate was essentially decreased by about 5/60ths of a second. On paper that doesn't sound like much, but exponentially this really just slows it down a lot. The Tri-Slosher essentially has the OG Slosher's lesser clearance capabilities, but a little worse as it deals 100 damage instead of 140 per slosh. Where this shines though, is that its attacks are much wider, so instead of attacking linearly, this does a much better job horizontally. To add, it's a lightweight weapon, meaning that you can move faster with it than most weapons, which all makes for a good versatile weapon. The S-Blast 92 has been an absolutely amazing weapon that inches so close to the top tiers. This is such a good blaster and has essentially all of the capabilities of both the Range Blaster and the Splat Charger. What I love so much is that it can one-shot steelheads with a whopping 300 damage per shot. As a result, this normally has the role that the Charger would play in this sense, which just makes it unfairly good as a blaster. If I may add, it has 300 DPS, which is faster than Range's 250. If you're in scenarios where you don't find good use for the small blast radius of the long range mode, that's where the short range mode comes in, as it fires like the Luna Blaster, making it excellent and an absolute powerhouse against crowds of lessers, fish sticks, and point blank targets. For the last weapon in the mid tiers, we have another Grisco weapon. That being the Grisco Stringer. What makes this shine is that it has insane power at point blank distance. With a tap shot DPS of 860 or charged shot DPS of 1065, it makes for a remarkable weapon that gives the Salmonids no mercy. And this wraps up the mid tiers for my personal Salmon Run experience. Every weapon here has went through either buffs to change my perception of the weapon for the better, or have been an overall solid weapon that isn't too weak nor the strongest. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe. As of right now, I am aiming for 1,000 subscribers, and every bit genuinely helps. I will see you next time when I release the finale of this series, that being the high tiers. Stay tuned.